21 Survey Design. Contents: 2.1 Introduction, 2.2 Preliminary considerations. That what is the preliminary consideration for survey design, and also the 2.21.3 is the stages and phases in survey research, and 21.4 formulation of research question, and 21.5 survey research designs, and 21.6 sampling design, and 21.7 conclusion. So quickly we'll look into the learning objectives. It is expected that after reading the unit 12, 21, this is you would be able to work out A, the purpose of inquiry, B, the unit on which the survey is to be focused, and C, the availability of resources. Divide the survey research into stages or phases. Formulate the kind of questions to be asked during the survey. Decide the type of research design to employ, and choose the sampling plan for survey. (21.1) Introduction. Design elements are crucial in understanding the complexity of undertaking a survey. The survey method involves several aspects which are crucial for its execution in a systematic and a scientific manner. Unit 21 provides a description of the basic dimensions of survey in social research. The topic discussed in this unit are preliminary consideration for undertaking survey research, different stages or phases in conducting a survey, formulation of research questions, types of research design, and details of sampling design. 21.2 is preliminary considerations. What is the basic consideration? The initial consideration that we have to take. So there are three preliminary considerations before any researcher decided to undertake survey as a method of social investigation. The considerations are: 1. Purpose of inquiry, 2. Population on which the survey is to be focused, and the resource availability. Each of these consideration is essential for survey research. First, the first prerequisite for undertaking survey research is clear and well-defined objectives, purposes, or research questions. The researcher must be clear that the survey method is the best method to study those objective, purposes, or research questions. If there is a clear idea about the objective of a research study, it leads to the choice of appropriate survey as a method of investigation. The second prerequisite is to specifying the population of study. This influences the decisions about sampling and resources. The accessibility of the population is an important element in developing survey design. It judges the duration of study, the different layers of people to be included, and the size of the research staff, and as well as the sample. The third important prerequisite in design a survey is to take a stock of the resources available for study. Resources may be in the form of financial cost, manpower requirements, and the total time within which the survey has to be completed. Surveys are usually labor intensive. The single largest expenditure being the fieldwork cost, which include the interviewing time, traveling time, and transport cost, etc. There are additional costs involved in survey research, namely the training and supervision of interviewers, questionnaire construction, pilot testing the questionnaire, printing, posting, coding, computer programming, etc. Thus, the researcher must estimate the availability of resources before starting the survey research. 21.3 Stages or phases in the survey research. Survey research called for a systematic and comprehensive collection of information about the attitudes, beliefs, and behavior of people. In a survey, the researcher follows a deductive method. He begins with a theoretical or applied research problem and ends with empirical measurement and data analysis. Once a researcher decided decides that the survey is the best and appropriate method to undertake his research, then elaborate steps taken in order to take the application of the method more scientific and systematic. Further, there is no unanimity among the researchers on the actual number of steps or their ordering. However, here we deal with a few major steps in three phases or stages that cover the preparation, planning, and execution of survey research. Stages or phases in survey research. First stage, the design and planning phase. Various steps here is that research question formulation, deciding the survey research design, draw the samples, data gathering techniques, questionnaire construction, pilot survey, finalization the survey instrument, training of the investigators. The second phase, data collection phase. There we have to locate the respondents, assessing the respondents and field settings, supervision and monitoring of main survey. After you get these data, you have to go for data analysis and reporting. There you have works like editing, coding, tabulation, and analysis, write-up, etc. So this is the major three stages of survey research. The first phase covers the design and planning of a survey. This is a very elaborate and long phase in which the details of conducting a survey are worked out. It is crucial as it sets the ground for the actual survey. The important steps in this phase of formulating a research question, deciding the survey research design, working out the sampling procedure, deciding the data gathering technique, construction of a questionnaire, conducting a pilot survey, modifying the survey instrument, training field investigators and reviewers. The second phase involves the execution of the main survey for data collection. It includes the locating and accessing the respondents and field setting, conducting the survey, monitoring and supervising of the field personnel. In third and final phase, the researcher edits the data collected, prepares code book, decides the tabulation for data analysis. Finally, the researcher prepares the write-up or report of the study. The listing of steps in sequential form may give the impression that once a step is covered, there is no turning back. However, to the contrary, it is often necessary to alter decisions made at an earlier point in the light of development such as the later stage of research. For instance, the problem encountered during the execution stage may call for a modification either of the sampling design or of the type of instrument for collection of the questionnaire. Further, it is also a mistake to assume that these steps can be followed one at a time without any regard for subsequent steps. In reality, it is often important to keep in mind the other steps while working out the details of one step. For instance, it is necessary to keep in mind the intended data analysis procedures while constructing the questionnaire. 21.4 Formulation of research question. The first step in a survey design is the formulation of research question. Research question here refers to the major goal, problem of objective of the study. In fact, the formulation of question should precede the selection of survey method and data collection. Through survey has a wide range of applications in the social sciences. It is may at times turn out that the other methods of data collection such as in-depth interviewing and participant observation etc. may be more appropriate or suitable for the problem chosen. Thus, it is necessary to think of the appropriateness of the survey method for investigating a particular research problem. Further, it may be kept in mind that there is a need to formulate a research question at the beginning of research, but this emphasis does not mean that the initial research question is the final one. Often, research questions arise unexpectedly in the middle of a conversation with the informant. This needs not be ignored. Their addition or modification of questions decided earlier is always a usual exercise. Box 21, refine your research questions. According to David D. Voss, it is important to know what we are looking for. It is a mistake to let the initials focus blind as to other unanticipated questions, which may perhaps be more interesting, important, or manageable than the initial one. The research questions can be refined and new issues emerge in the course of survey research. How does one arrive at a research question? Often the researcher's curiosity about a particular social phenomena gets him to choose a particular research question. However, the researcher can formulate his own research questions in more than one way. First, the starting point could be a theoretical or a model. The choice of theoretical framework or a model will have an implication on the mind of questions that the kind of the questions that they are to be formulated and the kind of the data are to be collected. Second, a significant social policy implication may be guide researchers in formulating their research problem. In other words, the problem chosen should be relevant to the issues of social improvement, social change, social action. Third, the goal of producing social criticism may lead to some researchers to formulate a research question suitable for that objective. Some research questions may meet several or some of the criteria, but it is rare that a research question will meet all of them. Further, it is important that the survey's general purpose be translated into a specific central problem or aim or objective. It is not enough to say, for example, I am interested in getting some answers about inequality. One should be clear about the kind of questions one wants to ask. What answers what questions? Does he has to know the extent of inequality, its distribution, its causes, its effects, or what? What sort of inequality one is to be interested in, and social, political, economic, extra over what period and where? The process is of narrowing down from a general area of interest to a level that it is specific enough for concrete empirical research to be carried out. After specifying the primary objective of the survey, the next steps involve the identification and itemizing of the subsidiary topics that relate to the central purpose. For example, in a study of students' attitudes to the quality of undergraduate education in a college, the subsidiary issues may include the quality of teachers, the infrastructural facilities, the admission procedures, the type of course offered, the content of the courses, the interactions between teachers and students, the facilities for remedial study, the facilities and scope for the extracurricular activities, etc. Once the subsidy items have been identified, the researcher looks for the specific information required relating to each of those items. For example, with respect to the type of courses required, detailed information is needed on the duration of courses, the status of the courses, credited or non-credited, orientation of the courses, theoretical or practical, etc. A thorough review of the existing literature, books and journals on the topic is helpful while narrowing the specific topic, identifying the subsidiary topics, itemizing the subsidiary topics, and spelling out the kind of information required on these topics for data collection. A review of literature is helpful because it reveals to us the scope and average research that has already been conducted and help us in identifying important gaps so that an attempt could be made to fulfill those gaps through survey research. There are other ways too that can help a researcher in formulating his research question. One is the exploratory study, which is a tentative and relatively unstructured investigation of a few people who are similar in many respects to those we intended to study as part of the main investigation. For instance, if we intended to work on the quality of an undergraduate education in a college, one may have to visit the undergraduate college, interview a few students, and identify the specific research questions for the study. The most important goal of such an exploratory study is that it stimulates the thinking of the researchers and helps him to identify the specific issues that may be worthy of inclusion in the study. Sometimes it may help us to understand the way the concepts are understood differently by different people. For instance, in other early examples, different students may differ directly from the notion of quality in undergraduate education. For some, it may mean good teachers teaching. For others, it may be good infrastructure of teachers, relevant world. Of range of go up here. For some time it may be for some time it may mean good teachers teaching. For others it may be good infrastructure or a range of relevant course of study, etc. Another aspect of the research question formulation is that of consultations with those who are knowledgeable about the topics and who have done related research. An encounter with these experts can help researchers in anticipating the pitfalls of the proposed research study. Reflections and action 12.1. Suppose you have to carry out a survey of waste disposal method and you need to formulate research questions, the workout or the major goal problems or objective of your study. Write down the answers to the following questions on a mind sheet of paper. Questions. In the light of the objective of your study, do you find the survey method a useful and appropriate way of data collection? Provide the specific reasons of accepting or rejecting the survey method as method in the data collection. How we have to arrive at each of these research questions, state clearly the choice of your theoretical model. Have you looked at the societal policy with regard to the waste disposal? Elaborate the implications of the policy in terms of its guiding your research problem. Is your study going to generate social criticism of an issue of importance for the general public? If yes, we need to work out how your study is going to lead other researchers to formulate further research in the same area. Have you understood the general objective of your study into a specific problem? It is important that you do the exercise at this stage and state the narrowing down of the problem from general to specific level for concrete research to be carried out. Have you consulted the experts in the area of your research to find out what to expect in your field inquiry and what are the likely pitfalls of anticipate and to be careful about? Write down answers to above in the help of the relevant text in section 21.4. Type of research questions. There is no simple way to define research questions. However, according to David DeVos, we can delineate the different kinds of questions and provide guidelines to help focus research. Descriptive research questions or explanatory research questions or both. Descriptive research questions. It is difficult to focus on descriptive questions, but 5 questions can help. What is the time frame of our interest? What is the geographic locations of our interest? Patterns for subgroups. What aspects of topics are we interested in? How abstract is our interest? Explanatory questions are research questions. Our first step in the formulating explanatory research question is to decide whether we are looking for causes and consequences. We must list possible causes and consequences and then collect relevant data. There are a number of ways of coming up with such list, namely previous research, the facts, or on hunches and interactions with the informants. 4 questions might help formulating explanatory questions, research questions. What am I trying to explain? What are the possible causes? Which causes will I explore? What are the possible mechanisms? Thus, there are varieties of issues that needs to be kept in mind while formulating the research questions. That process to undertake survey, a method of data collection, it actually triggers the mind of the researcher as how to operationalize the research. 21-point survey research designs. After the formulation of the research questions, we must decide the type of design to employ. Research designs for surveys are mainly of 2 types, namely experimental and descriptive. Experimental designs are used in environmental arrangement and rely on 2 or 3 groups of participant or observations. When a randomly constituted group or 100 children is compared 3 types, the survey design is called the experimental. The descriptive design procedures informations of group or groups and phenomena that already exist. No new groups are created. Descriptive designs are also called observational or explanatory designs. Experimental designs. According to Alney Fink, experimental designs are characterized by comparing 2 or more groups, at least one of which is experimental. The other is a control or comparison group. An experimental group is given a new or untested innovative program, interventions or treatment. The control is given an alternative, example the traditional program or no program at all. A group is any collective unit. Sometimes the unit is made up of individuals. with a common experience, such a man who have participated in a war, or those who have had undergone treatment at a hospital, or those who have attended a particular school. At other times, the unit is naturally occurring a classroom, business, hospital, or a prison. There are different types of controls. Firstly, there are concurrent controls in which participants are not randomly assigned to groups. Concurrent means that each group is assembled at the same time. For example, when 10 of 20 schools are randomly assigned to an experimental group, while at the same time 10 are assigned to a control group. You have a randomized trial or true experiment. Secondly, there are concurrent controls in which participants are not randomly assigned to groups. These are called non-randomized control trials, quasi-experiments, or non-equivalent controls. Thirdly, it is in self-controls, a group is surveyed 2 different times. These require pre-measure, post-measures, and are called longitudinal or before-after design. Fourthly, historical controls, which make us use of data collected for participants in other surveys. Finally, combination of consistent and concurrent controls with or without prerequisites, pre or post measures. Of all the experimental design, longitudinal designs are used quite often in social research. Longitudinal designs. In a longitudinal design, data are systematically collected over a period of months or years in such a way that it is possible to observe trends and attitudes or behaviors over the specified period. Considering the following example, if a researcher is interested in studying the changes in the spending behavior of white-collar employees, she or he will have to conduct the survey at different points at a time, on a time in a year or periodically. A study of this kind of problem involves longitudinal or time series designs. Trend studies and panel studies. There are 2 types of longitudinal designs: panel study and trend study. In panel study, the same respondents people are interviewed in 2 or 3 times. In a trend study, 2 or more different samples of people, respondents, are drawn at different times for the same population. You may have noticed that the television and newspaper media draw samples from time to time to study trends. Examples, box 21.2, examples of panel study and trend study. Suppose we wish to understand the changing support for the leading political parties in the general elections to the parliament 2 months before the election. For this study, we draw a sample of adults in the voting group of age group and 60, and support, let us say, political party 1. 1 month before the election, we interview the people who were a part of our sample. Perhaps 55% of them now support political party 1. This would be a panel study. On the other hand, if we draw a new samples of voters over month period and find that 55% of the new voters preferred political party 1, this would be a trend study. So trend studies provide the information on net changes, and panel studies provide the information on both net and gross changes. Suppose at a time 160 out of 80, 100 people, every 100 people say that they would vote for political party A. Between 1 and time 2, 10 of the political party A voters might change their opinion and vote for the political party B, and 5 of the political party B might vote for political party A. Thus between 1 and 2, time 1 and time 2, many people have changed their opinion, and this is a gross change. The net result of this individual change is that of a time 2 is 55 of every 100 people would vote for political party A. Thus, if we use a panel design, we can count the number of people in our sample who can change their opinion between time 1 and time 2. If we use a trend design, we can describe the new change in the population, but we cannot count the number of individual change. If the net change is 5% from 60 to 55% supporting political party A, the gross change might be anywhere between 5% to 85%. Trend studies describe how the distribution of variables is changing for the population studied. Panel studies describe how individual members of a population are changing. Box 21.3, an example of panel design. Laser's field et al. Find a classic example of panel designs in People's Choice, 1945. The researchers interviewed a panel of 600 residents of Erie County Ohio, you say once a month between May and November 1940 with respect to how they intended to vote in the presidential election 1940. Of particular interest to these investigators was the process by which the panel members decided to vote the way they eventually did. There are both advantages and disadvantages to panel design. Most of the advantages relate to being able to interview the same respondent repeatedly over a period of months or years to see if any changes occur in their thinking or attitudes. If we find shifts in attitude or reports behavior, we are in a better position to argue that there has been a real change in the population. Another advantage of panel design is that they permit much more information to be collected about each respondent than is feasible through other designs. So panel designs also avoid a heavy dependence on the memory of respondent for information about his time covered by the panel. However, they may still rely on memory for questions about the respondent's past. The primary disadvantage of panel study is sample mortality. That is, there will be a loss of panel members owing to lack of cooperation, death or change of residence, etc. Another disadvantage is that it can take long time to collect data and hence the cost involved may be more. Further, repeated surveys on the same population may cause respondents to become overly sensitized to their role as selective respondents. Descriptive design. There are two types of descriptive designs, namely cross-sectional designs and cohort designs. Cross-sectional designs. In a cross-sectional design, the data is collected at one point in a time. That is the most frequently used and most fundamental design in social surveys and is sometimes called single-shot survey. The design is most appropriate for making inferences about the characteristics of the population from which the sample is drawn and the inferences about the relationship between variables at the point in time at which the data is collected. The interviewing for each studies is sometimes carried out in less than a week, but more typically requires a few weeks and in some cases a few months. For example, a survey of current people's choices of political party is a cross-sectional survey. A research might use the data either to describe a sample on one variable or a number of variables or to demonstrate the association between these variables. Consider the following example. A researcher is interested in exploring the attitudes of the parents on the education of their children. He selects a sample of householders within a school-going children in a community, rural or urban, and interviews the parents in those selected households. After the interviews are completed, the researchers are analyzes the data and draws conclusions. The research design involves here is a cross-sectional design. One of the advantages of this design is that researchers can classify sample into many quite different subgroups to explore the separate dimensions of the research topic. A researcher may also use this design in causal analysis. Interestingly, by asking questions about the past, it is possible to study certain longitudinal over time social phenomena such as social mobility using a cross-sectional design. However, the cross-sectional design have two important limitations. One is it's difficult to establish the time order of the variables. It is difficult to analyze the change over time. To illustrate the first point, suppose in a study we find that the organizational affiliations is associated with political efficiency, feeling that one can influence the political system. The question arises as to whether our respondents first giant organizations and later came to feel efficacious because of their experience in that organization, or whether they felt efficacious first, which led to them to join the particular organization. Alternatively, whether both the causal sequences are operating either for different people or for the same people. If we gather data at one point in time, it is difficult to know when differences on each variable developed. Since causes come because of effects, it is difficult to know in a cross-sectional design which variable should be taken as independent and causal agent. A second limitation of the cross-sectional design is that it is difficult to use it for analyzing changes over time. Consider the analysis of voting behavior. At any given point during an election, we can ask respondents how they would vote if the elections were held today. However, voting decisions might change during a campaign, and different voters may expect different patterns of change. Some know their choice from the beginning and never vary. Some switch back and forth between candidates. Some are undecided until election day. Moreover, people who decide early in the campaign and never waver may have different characteristics and may experience different pressures than people who decided late. In some, data collected at one time make it difficult to understand some social process that occur over time. Two cohort designs. These forward-looking or prospective designs provided data about changes in a specific population. Suppose a survey of the aspirants of athletes participating in 1996 Olympics is given as in 1996, 2000, 2004. This is a cohort design, and the cohort design is 1996 Olympics. Cohort designs are can also be retrospective or look back over time, historical, if the events being studied eventually occurred before the onset of the survey. For example, suppose a group of persons was diagnosed 10 years ago with a disease X. If you survey their medical records to the present time, you are using a retrospective cohort. Reflections and actions 21.2. In the case of your study of waste disposal methods, you would have formulated research questions and then also refined them. For making clear the type of research questions and the type of research designs you have formulated and adopted, answer the following questions on a sheet of paper. Questions: are the questions formulated by you and a mixture of different types of mentioned in the text, or of one specific type only? What type of survey design have you selected from the survey in your research on waste disposal methods? Write in details about the type of design you have selected and also given reasons why you have selected this one, and not any of the other designs mentioned in the text. 21.6 Sampling design. After survey design have been selected, a sampling plan must be chosen. Any detail about sampling have been discussed earlier in the units of block 4 and 5, and therefore I am including only those that are new. Why sampling? Because the researchers may not include the whole of the population in survey research for reasons of cost and manpower. A part of the population is selected for understanding the characteristic of a population. Sampling, therefore, is a process of systematically selecting cases for inclusion in a research project. A researcher gets a set of cases or a sample that is more manageable and cost effective to work with than the pool of all cases. For example, it would be much less costly and time consuming to measure variables on 200 than 20,000 people. The researchers is not just interested in a small subset of cases. Instead, he would like to generalize about the entire pool. If well done, sampling lets the researchers measure variables on the smaller sets of cases but generalize the result accurately to all cases. For instance, if sampling is well conducted, a researcher can measure variables with say 2000 cases and generalized at 200 million. Survey researchers argue strongly that there would only be a 2 to 4% variation if all these 200 million cases were used for the study. The next question is how it is possible to generalize from a handful of cases. It is not based on any magic but on logical statistical reasoning that have been tested repeatedly with the empirical evidence. Moreover, a researcher cannot use just any sample for the purpose of generalization. There are well laid down principles, procedures that require rigorous exercises in order to increase the level of precision in a study. Basic terms in sampling. A sampling element. A sampling element is the unit of analysis or case in a population. It can be a person, a group, organization, a written document, or a symbolic message, or even a social action that like Davos fight, etc. that is being measured. 2. Population. It is the large pool of elements for which a symbol is drawn. Sometimes the term universe is used interchangeably with population. To define the universe or population, a researcher specifies the unit being sampled, the geographical location and the temporal boundaries of population. The term target population refers to the specific pool of cases that researchers want to study. Sampling ratio. The ratio of the size of the sample to the size of the target population is the sampling ratio. For example, a college of 2000 students and the researchers chose a sample of 200 from it. Thus, the sampling ratio is 0.1%, that is 10%, 0.1. So, for the sampling frame, what is sampling frame? A population is an abstract concept. Except for a specific small population, one can never truly freeze a population to measure it. For example, in a city, at any given moment, some people are dying, some people are traveling outside the city, some has gone out of temporary migration to other cities, or some are taking birth. The researchers must decide exactly who to count. Should he count a city resident who happens to be on a holiday, or outside the city when the time is fixed for the study? Therefore, the notion of population is abstract and it exists in the mind, but it is impossible to pinpoint concretely. Since it is an abstract concept, except for small population, as researchers need to estimate the population. Thus, it requires an operational definition. So, a researchers operationalize a population by developing a specific list that closely approximates all the elements in the population. This list is a sampling frame. The researchers may choose from any type of sampling frames: telephone directories, driving licenses, ration card members, membership of a club, students' registration in the university, etc. A good sampling frame is crucial to good sampling. A mismatch between the sampling frame and the conceptuality defined population can be a major source of error. For instance, if you select the telephone directory as a sample frame, it is considered only 5 to 10% of the population in a city, say Delhi. The directory does not list those who do not have a telephone connection. It also does not update quickly the frequent shifts in the residents and changes in telephone numbers in a city. So, parametric and statistic. Fifth is parameter and statistic. Any characteristic of a population is a population parameter. For instance, students from a science stream of children in the age group of 16 to 11 years, etc. It is the true characteristic of the population. Parameters defined as whether all the elements in a population are measured. The parameter is never known with absolute accuracy for large populations, so researchers must estimate it as based on samples. Researchers use informations for the sample called a statistic to estimate population parameters. Sampling arrays. If many samples are taken from the same population, it is unlikely that they will have characteristic identical either with each other or with the population. In brief, there will be what is called sampling error. Sampling error is not necessarily the result of mistakes made in the sampling procedure. Rather, a variation occurs due to the chance in selection of different individuals. Types of sampling designs. Sample designs are of two types. The first is called probability sampling designs, and the second is non-variable sample designs. In Unit 15 of Block 5 of our focus was on how to carry out calculations, while here we are discussing each type of sampling design in terms of its essential character and procedure. All the same view are likely to find some repetition subject matter which has been retained to reinforce the learning of the same. One, probability sampling design. Probability sampling provides a statistical basis of the stating that the sample is representative of the target population. In a probability sample, every element in the population has a known chance of being included in the sample. That means every member on the target population has non-zero probability of being included in the study or sample. This allows the estimates of the accuracy of the sample findings in approximating what we would find out if we have conducted a census of the total population. Non-probability sampling design. In non-probability sampling designs, we do not know whether an element of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Its probability of selection cannot be determined as its probability sampling where each element has 50% chance in being selected and 50% chance of not being included in the sample. Then probability samples are drawn based on the judgment regarding the characteristic of the target population and the needs of the survey. With non-probability sampling, some members of the eligible target population have a chance of being chosen and those do not. The statistical estimate, the precision cannot be made with this sample. The non-probability sampling designs are preferred when there is no possibility of probability sampling. Whenever feasible, probability sampling designs are preferred. Probability sampling procedures. 1. Simple random sampling. In a simple random sampling, each member of the population under study has an equal chance of being selected. The method involves selecting a random from a list of population, a sampling frame, the required number of subjects for the sample because the probability and the chance the sample should contain subjects with characters similar to the population as a whole. For example, some old, young, some tall, some short, some rich, some poor, etc. One essential requisite of this kind of sampling is that the complete list of the population, the sampling frame, is needed. The best advantages of of a simple random sampling is that its researchers can get an unbiased sample without much technical difficulty. For instance, once a member or element is selected, he is not eligible for a second chance and is not returned to the pool. This is what makes the simple random sample relatively unbiased. The typical ways of selecting a simple random sample are mainly through a lottery or through a table or a random numbers, or now through computer generalized random numbers. The lottery method is adopted for small population or sampling frame. The bigger sampling frame, the computer generated numbers are selected. It may be kept in mind that a simple random sampling may not guarantee a perfect representation of the population. In other words, it may be wise to say that most random samples are close to the population most of the time, but not perfectly match the entire population. 2. Systematic sampling. This is a modified version of simple random sampling. It involves selecting cases or elements for a population list in a systematic rather than a random fashion. Here the research calculates a sampling interval rather than using a list of random numbers. The intervals become his quasi-random selection method. Thus, in a systematic sample, every nth number has a chance to include in the sample. For instance, if you are to select 10 cases out of the total 100, every 10th will have a chance to be selected. In this case, n is any number between 1 and 10. Thus, the starting point in the systematic sample is chosen as random. In most cases, a simple random sample and a systematic sample yield virtually an equivalent result. One important situation in which a systematic sampling cannot be substituted for simple random sampling occurs when the elements in a sample are organized in a cycle or pattern. For example, if sampling is organized of a married couple with the male first and the female second, but a pattern gives the searchers an unrepresentative sample if a systematic sample is used. A systematic sample can be non-representative and included only wives or only husbands, depend upon the manner in which cases are organized or patterned. Stratified sampling. Third, stratified sampling. Stratified sampling involves dividing the population into homogeneous groups, subgroups, or strata. Each group containing subjects with similar characteristics. For example, in the earlier example, group A might contain only males and group B only females. After dividing the population into strata or subgroups, the researcher draws either a random sample or a systematic sample or both from each of the subgroups. How does one decide on subgroups? The strata or subgroups are chosen because evidence is available that they are related to the outcome. The justification of the selection of the strata can come from literature and expert opinion. In stratified sampling, the researcher controls the relative size of each stratum rather than letting random process control it. This guarantees representation of different strata within a sample. However, one condition is that the stratified sampling procedures produce samples that are more representative of the population than simple random samples or systematic sample if the stratum information is accurate. 4th, cluster sampling. The most widely employed probability sample design in survey research is cluster sampling. It addresses two problems. First is the lack of good sampling frames, and the second, the cost involved in researching a sample element or case. For example, there is no single list of undergraduates in colleges of a city. Even if one gets an accurate sampling frame, it would cost too much to reach many of these undergraduates as the colleges are spread out geographically in the city. In this case, instead of using single sampling frame, researchers use a sampling design that involves clusters. In this case, the cluster will be the college. A cluster is a naturally occurring unit, example school, which can have many classrooms, students, teachers, as cities with zones, namely east, west, south, north, etc., states, etc. The clusters are selected randomly and all members of selected clusters are included in the sample, or simple, random, or systematic or stratified samples are taken out of each other cluster. Cluster sampling is used in large surveys. It differs from stratified sampling in that which cluster sampling one start with a naturally occurring constituency. The researchers selected from above the clusters, and either surveys all members of the selection or randomly selected from among them. The resulting sample may not be representative of areas not covered by the cluster, nor does one cluster necessarily represent another. Fifth one is the stage sampling. Stage sampling is also known as multi-stage sampling. Is an extension of cluster sampling. It involves selection of samples in several stages. That is, taking samples from samples. Suppose we want to survey children's academic performance in school for a large city. One type of stage might be to select number of schools at random, and from each of these schools select a number of classes and select the children from within these classes. Another type of stage sampling would be to select one school in terms of either in geographical region of the school, in the community or city, in terms of the type of school, public, private, aided, private, unaided, etc., and take their samples, random sampling, systematic sampling, or stratified sampling, or even mixture of all this. Non-probability sampling procedures. 1. Accidental or convenience sampling. This is also called man-on-the-street survey, and it involves choosing the individual's cases that are readily available on the street, at a marketplace, at a school, or at a cinema theater, etc., until the required sample size is obtained. This kind of survey can produce ineffective, highly unrepresentative samples, and it is not recommended. When a researcher haphazardly selected a sample that is convenient, he can easily get a sample that seriously misinterprets the population. Such samples are cheap and quick, although bias and errors are there in plenty. An example of this kind of survey is the kind of interviews television programs conduct on the street. Quota sampling. Quota sampling has often been described as non-probability equivalent of stratified sampling. In quota sample, the researchers divides the population into subgroups or categories such as men and women, reserved caste and non-reserved caste, arts and commerce, younger and older, etc., and then decide the proportion of individuals in each category or subgroups. Thus, the number of respondents is fixed in various categories of the sample. Quota sampling is an improvement because the researchers can ensure that some population different from the same sample. However, it is not to argue that it's fully representative. For instance, once quota categories are selected in quota sampling, the actual number of individuals in each category is selected based on the convenience or accidental sampling. Further, researchers bias may auto creep into the selection of actual cases of individuals who are included in the study. Third, purpose of or judgmental sampling. In purposive sampling, researchers handpick the cases to be included in the sample based on their judgment of their typicality. That means the judgment of the researcher is used in selecting cases with a specific purpose in mind. Purposive sampling is appropriate in the following three situations. First, a researcher uses is to select unique cases that especially inform. Second, as researchers may use purposive sampling to select members at a difficult to reach specialized population. Third, the purposive sampling is referred when researchers want to identify particular types of cases for in-depth investigation. Fourth, dimensional sampling. This is further refinement quota sampling. It involves identifying various factors of interest in population and obtaining at least one respondent or every combination of these factors. With this snowball sampling, it is also called a network of chain or referrals or reputational sampling, etc. It is method of identifying, sampling, or selecting the cases in a network. Snowball sampling is based on the analogy of a snowball which begins small but becomes larger as it rolls on wet snow and picks up additional slope. Friends networks are the most important source of this kind of sampling. Further, professional association, chat groups, etc. may also provide basis for such sampling. Sample size. A question often asked is of the size of the sample. How large should be? The best answer could be it depends. That means that there is no clear-cut answer to this question. However, the literature on survey sampling does give a generic advice to prospective survey researchers. For some people, a sample of 30 is the bare minimum. If the researchers plan to some form of statistical analysis of the data, however, the size of the sample depends upon the plans of the researcher and how accurate that sample has to be for his purpose and on population characteristic. It may be stated here that a large sample alone does not guarantee a representative sample. Further, when we increase the sample size, we increase cost. Larger samples mean increased cost. A researcher may keep in mind all these considerations while judging the size of the sample. In section 15.3 of unit 15, you have already learned how to calculate sample size when estimating mean and when sampling for population. Reflection and action 21.3. Discuss in a note of about 500 words the sampling type and design of the survey you need to carry out in your research on waste disposal methods. While writing the note, take up help of relevant text in the unit. 21.7 Conclusion. This unit has attempted to discuss the initial concerns of the survey researcher. It spelled out the essential prerequisite for undertaking a survey and the steps to be followed in survey research in order to make it more systematic. The unit provided a detailed account of research question formulation, survey research designs, and the sampling designs. Thus, it tried to equip the student with the basic terms and concept and the process with suitable examples. You can have further reading. The books like the Survey the Social World, Principles and Practices in Survey Research, and the other book is the Survey Handbook, and then Research Methods in Education and Survey Methods in Social Investigation, and the book is David D. Walls, Survey in Social Research. So this is the end of the unit 21. Thank you very much.